There are 298 people on death row in the state of Florida. James Rhodes, 78 years old, 46 years on death row. For the murder of Lisa Lynn Berry, an 80-year-old girl whose battered and nude body was found by a canal in Davie, Rose has been sentenced to death. The girl's mother has been romantically involved with Rose. Lisa was picked up by Rose at the bowling alley her mother worked at, and she was never heard from again. 4 days later, the girl's body was found. According to the prosecution, she was hammered to death. For more than 43 years, James Franklin Rose went unpunished for the 1975 beating, essay, and murder of Jean Savage in her suburban Delray Beach home. The murder of Savage generated few early leads before going cold until 2015. The cold case unit reviewed the murder's initial evidence at that point and discovered a match. Rose was linked to the murder by DNA evidence, and in an interview with sheriff's officers, he acknowledged his involvement. Harold Lucas, 72 years old, 46 years on death row. For the 1976 murder of 16-year-old Anthea Jill Piper, Lucas has been waiting for death since 1977. Lucas, who later claimed to be drunk at the time of the murder, fatally shot Piper 7 times inside her home. He was found guilty of Piper's murder and the attempted murders of her 2 companions whom he had injured but managed to survive. Harold Lucas knew Jill Piper for 4 years, and they also used to date. One witness testified that Lucas stated they were going to get married. James Hitchcock, 67 years old, 46 years on death row. A few weeks prior to the murder, James Hitchcock, who was unemployed, moved in with his brother Richard and his family in Orlando. On the night of the murder, Hitchcock stayed up late with his brother and his family to watch television until about 11 p.m. At that point, Hitchcock left the house and spent the next several hours in Winter Gardens with some pals, smoking and drinking beer. Hitchcock returned to the home at 2:30 a.m. according to a statement he made to the police after being apprehended. He entered the house through the dining room window before making his way upstairs to the victim's bedroom. He essayed Richard's stepdaughter, who was just 13 years old. The victim informed Hitchcock that she had been hurt and that she would tell her mother what happened. She then started screaming when Hitchcock forbade her from leaving the bedroom. To stop her from yelling, Hitchcock choked her and led her outdoors. He then battered and choked the victim till she stopped making noise, after which he dumped her body in the bushes close to the house. After the crime, Hitchcock came home and took a shower before retiring for the night. Hitchcock claimed that shortly after the essay, his brother Richard entered the bedroom, brought the girl outdoors, and then he choked her. According to Hitchcock, he tried to stop Richard from strangling the girl, but it was too late. According to reports, Richard had assured Hitchcock that he had no plans to really murder his stepdaughter and that this was an accident. Richard was assured by Hitchcock that he would protect him. Brian Jennings, 65 years old, 37 years on death row. On May 11, 1979, the naked body of 6-year-old Rebecca Kunash was discovered in a canal in Brevard County. The autopsy report states that she had a fractured skull. Asphyxiation was the second cause of death after being assayed. Brian Jennings broke into Rebecca's bedroom and sealed off her airways until she passed out, according to the evidence presented at trial. Jennings threw the victim to the ground so hard when they left the house that she had a broken skull. After moving the child to a nearby canal, Jennings essayed her and then held her head under the water for about 10 minutes. Michael Rivera, 61 years old, 36 years on death row. Stacy Lynn Jasvac rode her bicycle to the store on January 30, 1986 to get school supplies. Her mother started looking for her when she didn't come home. A Broward County deputy sheriff who had located Jasvac's bicycle was confronted by the mother. At that point, a police inquiry started. Upon receiving a call from a man claiming to be Stacy Lynn Jasvac's killer, Star Peck reported the incident to the police. Peck stated that a man who identified himself as Tony contacted and talked to her about his thoughts regarding sex while dressed as a woman. Peck had more than 30 of these calls from Tony. Peck's final call came not long after Jasvac was killed. Tony told Peck that he intended to expose himself to Jazvac since he had seen her get off a bike. Tony claimed to have forced Stacy into the van, put ether over her mouth, and then essayed her inside. He also said that he had no intention of killing the 11-year-old girl, but it still happened. Similar calls from a man named Tony were reported by other local women as well. According to the authorities, Tony was actually Michael Rivera, an employee of Peck. Police discovered Stacy Lynn Jazvac's body on February 14, 1986, in a Coral Springs field. She suffocated to death, according to the medical examiner. James Daly, 77 years old, 36 years on death row. In the gruesome 1985 Florida killing of 14-year-old Shelley Brgh, Daly was found guilty. She had 31 stab wounds when she was discovered naked in a canal. Most of the injuries were to her hands, which the authorities believe were caused by her attempt to defend herself. She was probably still alive when she was pulled into the river and left to die, according to a medical examiner. According to his lawyers, there is no physical or forensic evidence linking Daly to the homicide. Daly's roommate, Jack Piercy, was a person of interest in the investigation at the time of the murder. He admitted that he at least once stabbed the girl, but Daly was the one who murdered her. Piercy signed a declaration saying he acted alone in the death of Brgh, but later recanted. The document stated, "James Daly had nothing to do with the murder of Shelley Brgh. I committed the crime alone. James Daly was back at the house when I drove Shelley Brgh to the place where I ultimately killed her." Tony Davis, 53 years old, 28 years on death row. From September 1992 to December 1992, Tony Davis shared a home with Gwen Cunningham. On December 9, 1992, Gwen Cunningham left Davis to watch over her 2-year-old daughter Kalisha while she did errands. Thomas Moore, a friend of Davis, showed up at the flat around 12:45. Kalisha was slung over Davis's arm as he opened the door. Moore was informed by Davis that Kalisha had choked on a French fry, and Davis revived her while Moore dialed 911. Davis's elevated voice and thumping sounds were heard coming from the apartment before the 911 call, according to the neighbors. When Kalisha was evaluated at the flat, she was wet, unresponsive, and had blood in her mouth. She was fully dressed when Gwen Cunningham left the apartment, but she was naked from the waist down when they found her. Kalisha was revived but passed away on December 10, 1992. In addition to injuries that showed essay, the emergency department doctor who examined Kalisha saw bruises, swelling of the brain, and pools of blood in the skull. 4 hits to the head resulted in cerebral bleeding, which was the cause of death. Kalisha's hair bow was discovered in the bed, and her blood was discovered on Davis's underpants, pillowcase, sheet, and in the bathroom. James Ducket, 66 years old, 35 years on death row. On the evening of May 11, 1987, in the Florida city of Mascot, James Ducket was the only policeman out on patrol. Around 10 p.m., Teresa McCabe, age 11, strolled to a convenience store to buy a pencil and, as she was leaving, paused to chat with a 16-year-old male outside the shop. Soon after, Ducket entered the convenience store and asked the shopkeeper how old McCabe was before approaching the man and the youngster. Ducket instructed McCabe to go home after a brief talk, leaving the youngster to wait for his uncle. The 16-year-old and his uncle saw McCabe enter the passenger side of Duckett's patrol vehicle. McCabe's mother went to the convenience shop around 11 p.m. in search of her daughter. The mother was informed by the store clerk that McCabe had left the premises with Ducket and was most likely at the Mascot police station. The mother drove to the nearby Groveland police station and reported her daughter missing after no one was located at the Mascot police station. Ducket arrived at the Groveland police station in 20 minutes after the Groveland police officer made contact with a Mascot police officer. Using a photo of McCabe, Ducket created a flyer that he promised to publish at local convenience stores, but he never did. The store clerk stated that Ducket stopped by about 9:30 p.m., but did not return for a few hours, despite the fact that the police drove by the business every hour. Additionally, from 9:50 p.m. and 12:10 a.m., Ducket did not make any radio calls. Maccabee's body was discovered in a lake the following morning, less than a mile from the convenience store where she had been last seen. Medical evidence proved that she had been essayed while still alive, before drowning. Her underwear had blood, and later it was determined that genetic material of Ducket was also present. The tires found on the patrol cars of the Mascot Police Department were linked to distinctive tire tracks seen at the scene. She was apparently sitting backwards on the car's hood because Ducket and McBee fingerprints were discovered there. 3 witnesses who were between the ages of 17 and 19 stated at the trial that Ducket had made advances and given rides to each of them in the 6 months before the murder. One of the girls admitted in court that she had relations with Ducket. Guillermo Arbeláez, 66 years old, 32 years on death row. On February 14, 1988, Guillermo Arbeláez was found guilty and given the death penalty for the abduction and murder of Julio Rivas, a 5-year-old boy. Arbeláez met the victim's mother, Graciela Alfara, at a cafeteria where she was a waiter. After a while, Arbeláez moved in with Alfara, paying $150 a month for a room he would share with Alfara's cousin, who was 19 years old. Soon after Arbeláez moved in, the two of them got close, but when Alfara accused him of essaying one of her daughters, the relationship quickly terminated. Alfara gave the defendant till February 15, 1988 to leave. Arbeláez claimed that he and Alfara, who were scheduled to be married on February 15, 1988, were still together at the time, but on February 13, Alfara returned home after hours with a different man, and Arbeláez saw her kiss him goodnight. Alfara slept the following morning, and Arbeláez removed her son Julio Rivas from the house. At Alfara's workplace, Arbeláez made a coffee stop, and observers noted that he appeared composed and normal. There, Arbeláez told a friend of his that Alfara had been unfaithful and that he was going to do something to ensure that she would never forget him. Arbeláez drove to the top of the Powell Bridge after leaving the cafeteria, pulled over, and raised the hood of his vehicle to make it appear as though he had broken down. The youngster was then grabbed by the arms and thrown over the edge of the 70-foot-high bridge by Arbeláez. He then sped away from the incident, left his car in a nearby neighborhood, and made his way to the house of his buddy, Pedro Salazar. Arbeláez admitted to Salazar that he wished to get revenge on Alfara. He took a flight to Puerto Rico before returning to his native country of Colombia, where he was found on March 16, 1988, by Miami cops. He was detained at Miami International Airport on April 11, 1988, as soon as he exited customs. A medical examiner testified during Julio Rivas' trial that he drowned and he was also strangled to death. The boy's body had numerous huge bruises and his head had numerous abrasions. The pathologist concluded that these injuries were sustained before he passed away. Alfara said in court that her son didn't have the scrapes and bruises the morning he was taken. William Sweet, 56 years old, 32 years on death row. William Sweet was found guilty of killing 13-year-old Felicia Bryant, and he received a death sentence. 3 men physically harassed and robbed Marcine Kofer in her apartment in June 1990. Kofer was able to place 2 of her attackers by name, and on June 26, 1990, she was transported to the police station to use photos to try to place the 3rd attacker. The following evening, Detective Robinson returned Kofer to her apartment. As Kofer left the detective, William Sweet was observing from a distance. Sweet had already named himself to a friend as the 3rd person responsible for the assault and robbery. Kofer asked her next-door neighbor, Mattie Bryant, if she could let her 2 children, Felicia and Sharon Bryant, stay with her in her apartment that same evening. Around 8 p.m., Mattie consented, and the girls headed over to Kofer's house. Sharon reported hearing a loud kick on the apartment door about 1 a.m. Kofer was awakened, and she told her about the noise. Kofer looked around and urged Sharon not to be concerned because it seemed that whoever had been there had left. Kofer then returned to her bed. Sharon again informed Kofer when she noticed someone yanking on the screen in the living room. Then Kofer peered through her front door's peephole and saw Sweet standing in front of the flat. Felicia was instructed by Kofer to bang on the bathroom wall in order to wake her neighbor and mother, Mattie Bryant. A few minutes later, Mattie hurried over. Kofer was positioned at the end of the line behind the door as the other 3 women lined up. William Sweet pushed his way inside the apartment as they tried to escape while attempting to hide his face with a pair of jeans. Sweet started shooting at Kofor before moving on to the other 3 women. It was 6 shots. Both Kofor and Felicia received 2 shots. The gunshot wounds to Felicia's abdomen and hand caused her death. On June 28, 1990, William Sweet was detained. Jeffrey Hutchinson, 61 years old, 22 years on death row. On the evening of September 11, 1998, Jeffrey Hutchinson and Renee Flaherty, his live-in girlfriend, got into a fight. After the argument, Hutchinson departed and headed to a pub after loading some of his clothing and weapons into his truck. "Renee is pissed at me," Hutchinson said to the bartender, who knew both Hutchinson and Flaherty. After downing some beer, Hutchinson turned around and walked away, mumbling to himself. As he exited the bar, he drove erratically, according to witnesses. A 911 call came in from Hutchinson's house around 40 minutes after he left the bar. In the call, the caller said, "I just shot my family, and there were some guys here." Friends recognized Hutchinson's voice as the caller. Within 10 minutes of the call, deputies arrived and saw him lying on the ground in the garage. The bodies of Renee Flaherty, Logan Flaherty, who was just 4 years old, and Amanda Flaherty, who was 7 years old, were discovered by deputies in the master bedroom. Each had received a single shotgun blast to the skull. 9-year-old Jeffrey Flaherty was discovered shot twice, once in the head and once in the chest, in the living room. Hutchinson had Joffrey's body tissue on his scalp and gunshot residue on his hands. He claimed that 2 males entered the home and that he engaged them in combat. After shooting Renee and the kids, they ran away. Hutchinson was evaluated both on the spot and in custody and was found to be unharmed. Philip Partin, 58 years old, 15 years on death row. On December 1, 2008, a jury returned a verdict of 9-3 in favor of the death penalty for Partin for the murder of 16-year-old hitchhiker Joshan Ashbrook on July 31, 2002. Partin picked up Ashbrook on July 31 while she hitchhiked through Florida, according to the evidence during this trial. Partin's daughter, who was 7 at the time, joined him and Ashbrook for a day of swimming and fishing before they went back to the Newport Richie home, where he and his daughter were residing. Authorities believe Ashbrook was killed between 9 o'clock and midnight. Workers discovered her dead in the woods of Shady Hills Road the following morning. Her neck had been fractured, her throat had been slashed. 9 days after the discovery, Partin left the state after dropping off his daughter in Wauchula. He had been on the run for more than a year when police finally located him in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Billy Shephard, 37 years old, 11 years on death row. During an attempted armed robbery, Patrick Stafford, 39 years old, was shot and killed by Shephard. 3 hours later, Shephard killed 16-year-old Monquel Wimberly when he was nearby riding his bike after stealing a car from a grocery shop in Jacksonville. Shephard was arrested and charged with aggravated assault in 2001 when he was 14 years old, after shooting into a car full of youngsters. His violent behavior resulted in one 15-year-old child receiving a gunshot wound to the leg. Stephen Cozy, 34 years old, 10 years on death row. Courtney Wilkes, 15 years old, was beaten, choked, and essayed by Cozy on June 16, 2011, in a forested location close to Seagrove Beach in Walton County. Wilkes and her family were on vacation when the murder occurred. Cozy was found guilty of the crime, and the jury, by a vote of 12-0, recommended that he be executed. Cozy committed the crime when he was just 21 years old. Michael Brgh, 31 years old, 10 years on death row. 5 people conspired to kill Seth Jackson, a teenager who lived in Bellevue, Florida, a small town in the state. The incident that led to the killing involved Seth, Amber Wright, and Michael Brgh, and was the result of their relationship, which ended horribly. When Seth and Amber began dating, they were just 14 years old. However, their relationship didn't last, and after they split in March 2011, their online feud swiftly escalated into a physical one. Amber lured Seth to her female friend Charlie Ellie's house one night when he was jumped and killed. Due to the murder's extreme violence and both Seth and his attacker's age, the killing was especially shocking. Seth was only 15 when he was brutally murdered in April 2011 by his ex-girlfriend Amber, then 15 years old, Michael, then 18 years old, Kyle Hooper, Amber's stepbrother, who was just 16 years old, Justin Soto, then 20 years old, and Charlie Eli, Amber's female friend, who was 18 years old. Seth was kneecapped, subjected to torture, and shot repeatedly with a .22 caliber weapon. Following his death, his corpse was placed in a pyre and burned. The next day, Justin and Michael took Seth's remains to the Ocala quarry, where they placed them in paint buckets and dropped them into the water, while cinder blocks were used to weigh them down. Bleach was used by Kyle, Charlie, and Amber to clear the blood out of the house, but there was still proof of the crime that was subsequently discovered. Charlie's DNA would be discovered in a blood mixture that also contained Seth's blood in the living room, and Michael's DNA would be discovered in a blood mixture in the bathroom. The bullet discovered in Seth's remains was connected to the .22 caliber weapon, which allowed police to pinpoint the murderer. Amber was convicted of first-degree murder and received a life sentence. Charlie and Justin were given life sentences as well. After Charlie's conviction was later overturned in 2020, he pleaded guilty to a lesser offense and was eventually allowed to go free. For his part, Michael Brgh was found guilty of first-degree murder in August 2013 for orchestrating and carrying out Seth Jackson's murder. He was the only one sentenced to death. Edward Covington, 51 years old. 8 years on death row. Covington admitted to killing his then-girlfriend Lisa Renee Freeberg, 26 years old, and her two young children, Zachary and Heather Savannah, in 2008. According to reports, the former Department of Corrections officer murdered Freeberg and her small children inside their Lutz, Florida home, leaving behind a gruesome and bloody crime scene for investigators to find. It was eventually established that Covington had a history of drug usage, mental health problems, and animal cruelty, and that he had used drugs the day before the killings. The young mother was stabbed in the neck and strangled to death. She also had numerous bruises and defensive wounds on her body and face, which indicated that she had been attacked before the murder. He beat the young Heather before killing her. She was later dissected and had her head cut off. The little victim suffered several fractures as well as a cut to her skull's top. Zachary was stabbed at least 5 times in the neck and back, had his head crushed, and had his genitalia cut off. Craig Wall, 48 years old, 7 years on death row. For killing his girlfriend and their 5-week-old infant in 2010, Craig Wall received a death sentence. Wall had entered a no-contest plea to the first-degree murder of their son, Craig Wall Jr., and had admitted guilt to the first-degree murder of Laura Taft. Wall has had a difficult life and served 14 years in prison for armed robbery and robbery with a lethal weapon. Shortly after exiting, he ran into Taft. They welcomed Craig Wall Jr., popularly known as CJ, into the world shortly after Christmas 2009. However, the boy died 5 weeks later after suffering from brain damage and fractured ribs. Although Wall was suspected practically right away, he wasn't detained immediately. The fact that Wall was a suspect in his baby's death, clearly indicated on an arrest affidavit, was never brought up in court when he was arrested a few days later on a different offense. He was released on bail. Later, the Pinellas Pasco state attorney admitted that the case had not been handled properly. According to investigators, Wall entered Taft's apartment through a sliding glass door 3 days after being released from jail and fatally stabbed her. Mesak Damas, 47 years old, 6 years on death row. Gerlin Dio Damas and their 5 children, Michak, 9 years old, Marvin, 6 years old, Maven, 5 years old, Megan, 3 years old, and Morgan, just 1 year old, were stabbed to death in their North Naples home by Damas, who used a fillet knife to sever their throats. Gerlin Damas, his wife, dressed the subject of separation that evening, September 16, 2009, while they were at home. The discussion, according to Damas, turned frantic. The following day, after leaving work, Damas made his way to a nearby store and bought a Berkeley fillet knife, a roll of silver duct tape, and a box of gum. Damas claimed that his wife did not talk to him when he got home other than to ask him to sign immigration documents and inform him that she still intended to leave. Damas seized the knife at that point, bound her with a rope, and duct-taped her lips shut. As Gerlin Damas's family had not heard from her since Thursday, September 17, 2009, and she had not reported to work, they got in touch with the Collier County Sheriff's Office on Saturday, September 19, 2009, to report her missing. Gerlin Damas was found face down in a big pool of dried blood with a black trash bag over her head and her limbs bound with duct tape when deputies forced through the locked door. Her right elbow and right eye had suffered blunt force injuries, while her left shoulder and neck had severe, deep, sharp force injuries. The body of Mesak Damas was then found by deputies in a bedroom on the second floor, lying face down on a mattress on top of a pool of dried blood. He had severe sharp force injuries across nearly the entire length of his neck, as well as injuries to the palm of his right hand, according to the autopsy. Deputies entered a different bedroom on the second floor and found the bodies of the remaining 4 Damas children there, 2 of them lying next to each other on the floor, 1 on the bed and 1 on a mattress on the floor. Each of the 4 suffered neck injuries from a sharp force. Donald Smith, 67 years old, 5 years on death row. After a sequence of incidents that started when he met Cherish Periwinkle's mother, Rain Periwinkle, at a Dollar General shop, Smith was charged with her murder. Smith promised to take Rain Periwinkle and her daughters shopping at a Walmart. Smith promised to buy the family cheeseburgers at the nearby McDonald's while he was in Walmart, but he ultimately drove 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle away in a van. He was found guilty of essaying the young girl, strangling her, and dumping her body in a creek. Granville Ritchie, 45 years old, 3 years on death row. For the 2014 essay and murder of 9-year-old Felicia Williams, Ritchie is currently on death row. Young Felicia Williams was attacked and strangled by Ritchie before her body was placed in a suitcase and dumped into the ocean close to the Courtney Campbell Causeway. The woman who was watching her left her to buy drugs, leaving her with Ritchie alone. Before they met on May 16, 2014, Ritchie and Felicia were strangers, but they were both close to Ebony Wiley, who was the man's then girlfriend as well as the girl's neighbor and family friend. Felicia went to Ritchie's mother's apartment at the Doral Oaks apartment complex on the day of the murder, leaving her home with Wiley. Ritchie asked Wiley, who was watching Felicia, to go out and purchase some Mary Jane. The girl was later essayed and then strangled by Ritchie when Wiley was away. Ritchie claimed that he had given Felicia money to use to purchase candies at the local CVS store when Wiley arrived almost an hour later and did not find the little girl there. Marlin Joseph, 32 years old, 3 years on death row. For the murders of 36-year-old Kalada Crowell and her 11-year-old daughter Kyra Inglet on December 28, 2017, at a residence on 3rd Street in West Palm Beach, Joseph was given the death penalty. Kyra had previous issues with one of Joseph's daughters who was around her age. Investigators claimed that his daughter contacted him the day of the shooting to report another incident, even though the kids had resolved their differences by the time he arrived home. When Crowell arrived home, Joseph originally went to his room to read the Bible. However, he later approached her and shot her multiple times, including once in the head as she cried out for assistance. Then he is accused of chasing Kyra out of the house as she ran, hitting her 5 times, including 3 times in the head. Tyron Johnson, 47 years old, 1 year on death row. In November 2021, Tyron Johnson was found guilty of killing Stephanie Willis and her son Ricky, who was 10 years old. That evening, Johnson was inconsolable as he told investigators that he felt attacked by Stephanie and had no choice but to shoot her. Johnson claimed that Ricky got caught into the crossfire as he ran into the master bedroom. A different picture was painted by the prosecution, however. They claimed that after killing his girlfriend, Johnson went in search of Ricky, who was hiding, and then shot him. Bullet casings were found under the little boy's bed. Mark Wilson, 33 years old, 1 year on death row. Wilson was convicted of first-degree murder for the deaths of Robert Baker, 12 years old, and Tatian, 14 years old, who were both killed in August 2020. The boys were beaten with a hammer before having their throats slashed by Wilson, who at the time was living with his wife, the boy's aunt, in a shed on the family's Melrose property. During the killings, their mother, Sarah Baker, was sound asleep inside the residence. Wilson appeared to have repeatedly attempted to slit older brother Tatum's throat. According to reports, Robert, the younger brother, had his throat cut end to end, almost causing him to lose his head. During the trial, Baker testified that she had observed Wilson outside before the killings, honing a knife that would subsequently be identified as the murder weapon. An 18-foot blood trail led her to her oldest son's body, which she discovered. The extent of the boy's injuries were initially concealed by the blankets that both boys were wearing. Edward James, 62 years old, 28 years on death row. For a double homicide, the state of Florida gave James a death sentence. Edward James killed an 8-year-old girl and her grandmother, according to court records. Tony Neuner, 8 years old, was subjected to essay by Edward James before her grandmother, Betty Dick, was fatally stabbed. James escaped the scene in Betty's car, and he wasn't apprehended until he was featured on America's Most Wanted. Andrew Lukart, 50 years old, 26 years on death row. Lukart lived with his girlfriend, Misty Rue, and her 2 children, Ashley, age 2, and Gabrielle, age 5 months. On the afternoon of February 25, 1996, Rue put Ashley to sleep in her bedroom while Lukart stayed in the adjacent room with Gabrielle. Rue noticed Lukart leaving in her Wild Oldsmobile around 5 o'clock after hearing her car start. Gabrielle wasn't in the house, which was another thing she observed. After 30 minutes, Rue got a call from Lukart. He claimed that a person driving a blue Chevy Blazer had abducted the youngster from the house and that he was pursuing them in her car. He asked her to dial 911 to contact the police. Rue phoned the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office after waiting 20 minutes. A witness informed the Clay County Sheriff's Office that a car had veered off the road close to his property and that he was unable to locate the driver at around 6 p.m. Rue got a call from the Clay County Sheriff's Department while a deputy from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Department was speaking with her in her house. The officer reported that no one was inside Miss Rue's car when it was found, even though it had been driven off the road in Clay County. The area was searched, but neither the infant nor the driver could be located. A nearby resident, a Florida state trooper who was not on duty, was made aware of the search by the usage of helicopters. When he went outside, Lukart was in front of his yard. Putting his hands up, Lukart approached Trooper Davis and said, "I'm the one they're looking for. Read my rights to me." Due to Trooper Davis' incomplete understanding of the circumstances, he decided to handcuff Lukart before informing his dispatcher. Lukart was rescued by a deputy from the Clay County Sheriff's Office and brought back to the location of the abandoned car. Lukart ultimately acknowledged killing the infant around 18 hours after handing himself up. He said that while changing the child's diaper, he dropped her and then dumped her body in a pond in Jacksonville. Jason Stevens, 49 years old, 25 years on death row. For the murder of 3-year-old Robert Sparrow III, Stevens was found guilty and given the death penalty. On June 2, 1997, Jason Stevens and a number of helpers broke into Robert Sparrow Jr.'s apartment. Stevens entered the house brandishing a 9mm gun. Robert Sparrow III, who was just 3 years old, and Consuelo Brown, Sparrow's mother, were standing next to Stevens. Stevens confronted Brown and struck her in the face with the gun. After demonstrating that the gun was loaded by firing a bullet into the ground, Stevens demanded money and Mary Jane. A blue car was parked next to the home, and Stevens asked Robert Sparrow Jr. to give him the keys, but Sparrow did not have the car keys. Robert Sparrow III, Robert Sparrow Jr., Consuelo Brown, Kahari Brown, Tracy Williams, Derek Hosiak, and Tammy Cobb were the hostages. Stevens ordered them all to lie down, and an unidentified man held them all at gunpoint while Stevens searched the house for a room to hide them in. The hostages were forced to crawl to the bathroom by Stevens. Half-brother David Cobb of Robert Sparrow Jr. and his friend Roderick Gardner came at the house while the heist was taking place, and they were coerced into the toilet with the other hostages. The keys to Gardner's mother's green Kia were among the items taken from the man. Stevens displayed his ID to the prisoners and announced that Robert Sparrow III would be accompanying him as insurance. Stevens declared that if he wasn't followed, he would leave Robert Sparrow III somewhere. Stevens drove Robert Sparrow III away from the Sparrow residence in the green Kia because his thugs would not let him take the child in the black car they had used to get to the Sparrow residence. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, the black and green cars both drove off, stopping less than a mile away in a sunlit area with Robert Sparrow III still inside. The car wasn't discovered until after 9 that evening. The 3-year-old was discovered dead in the green Kia. Alex Pagan, 54 years old, 25 years on death row. Pagan was convicted for the murders of 6-year-old Michael Lynn, his father, Freddie Jones, and the attempted murder of his mother, Latasha Jones, and his 18-month-old brother, Lafayette Jones. On January 23, 1993, Pagan and Willie Graham broke into the victim's home and stole clothing, jewelry, and money, all of which were later discovered in Pagan's hands. Pagan and Graham intended to go back to the same residence because they had learned that they might be able to find an extra $12,000 to $13,000 there. On February 23, 1993, Pagan and Graham, both wearing ski masks, broke the sliding glass door to the victim's master bedroom, where Freddie, Latasha, and their infant Lafayette were asleep. One of the burglars started exploring the home when Freddie said he didn't have any money. Michael Lynn was taken to the master bedroom after he was discovered in another room. He then searched the rest of the house while holding Latasha at gunpoint. He took Latasha back into the bedroom and shot her with the gun when he was unable to locate the money. Latasha said that she could see through one of the gunman's masks, which was partially off, that he had white skin. The victim's car keys were then taken by one of them, who instructed the other to start the vehicle. Then Pagan, the shooter, tied everyone up. Once he had shot Freddie, he turned to Michael Lynn and said, "Shorty, if you live through this, don't grow up to be like me." Then he continued to shoot. Despite being shot, Latasha survived. She claimed to have heard between 7 and 8 bullets. Latasha escaped her bindings after Pagan and Graham left and yelled for Freddie and Michael. She took her infant and fled the house in search of assistance when neither of them responded to her questions. Michael Lynn and Freddie both passed away from gunshot wounds to the head and one to the buttocks, respectively. Search and arrest warrants were issued for Pagan on February 27, 1993 for the deaths of Freddie and Michael Lynn Jones, as well as the attempted murder of Latasha and Lafayette Jones. Willie Crane, 77 years old, 24 years on death row. On September 9, 1998, Crane met Catherine Hartman for the first time at a Hillsborough County pub thanks to his daughter. 4 hours later, around 1:30 or 2 in the morning, Crane and Hartman had finished their conversation and they were dancing. Hartman requested to see Crane again after Crane dropped her off at her trailer. On the afternoon of September 10, 1998, Crane visited Hartman's trailer where he met Amanda Brown, her 7-year-old daughter. Brown was finishing her homework while Crane and her were playing games at the kitchen table. Crane accepted Hartman's invitation to come back for supper that night before departing that afternoon. When Brown begged her mother to let her visit Crane's trailer, she accepted. In his white pickup truck, Crane drove Hartman and Brown to his trailer. Crane and Brown started viewing the movie in Crane's living room before moving to his bedroom, where Hartman discovered them watching the film while seated on Crane's bed. Brown fell asleep on Hartman's bed at about 2:15 a.m. The following morning, Hartman awakened to discover Brown missing and Crane gone. When she phoned Crane on his cell phone, he informed her that he was loading his boat at a boat landing and that he had no idea where Brown was. Trial witnesses stated that when Crane was launching his boat, he looked to be carrying something that resembled a rolled-up article of clothing. One of the guys who was at a boat ramp that day testified that Crane told him twice that he could dispose of a body somewhere where no one could find it. Additionally, he admitted to authorities that he unintentionally spilled bleach in his bathroom and that he had to spend the early morning hours cleaning it. An investigator used luminol, a substance that reacts with blood, on Crane's restroom while examining his trailer. In his testimony at trial, the detective said that the walls, bathtub, and floor lit up. Additionally, the bloodstains in the toilet and on Crane's boxer shorts both included DNA that was compatible with the blending of Crane and Brown's DNA profiles. Brown's body was never found despite an exhaustive 2-week search of Upper Tampa Bay. Howard Alt, 57 years old, 24 years on death row. Alt was found guilty in 1999 of essaying and killing Deanne Mumin, 11 years old, and her 7-year-old sister, Alicia Jones, in Oakland Park. The girl's mother, Donna Jones, was living with her daughters in Oakland Park's Easterling Park at the time of the killings. At the campground, Jones and Alt had become friends. Alt offered to drive her girls home from school in his truck on November 4, 1996. Instead, he took them to his Fort Lauderdale home, where he essayed Deanne before strangling both her and her sister. Later, he concealed their corpses in his attic. Their bodies were discovered 2 days later. Michael Reynolds, 68 years old, 20 years on death row. For a triple homicide, the state of Florida gave Reynolds a death sentence. According to court records, Reynolds killed Danny Privet, Robin Razor, and Christina Razor, who was 11 years old. Shirley Razor, the mother of the victim Robin Razor, traveled to the killing scene on July 22, 1998 to provide supplies that Danny needed there to work on trailers. Shirley arrived at the house and saw Danny on the ground outside. She went to her own trailer on the side to have lunch because she was used to seeing Danny drunk and unconscious. Shirley had just finished her lunch when she decided to visit Danny and Robin in their trailer again and saw that Danny had a hole in his head. She sprinted to a neighbor's house and dialed 911 when she realized he was actually dead. After the firefighters arrived, Shirley went to her daughter's trailer and discovered her daughter Robin and her granddaughter Christina inside, both of whom were dead. Thomas Bevel, 42 years old, 18 years on death row. Bevel was found guilty of shooting and killing Garrick Stringfield and his 13-year-old son, Philip Sims, in 2004. Bevel and others claimed that Stringfield and Bevel were drug dealers. When Sims was fatally shot, he was engaged in video game playing. Bevel was also convicted of wounding a woman visiting Stringfield, who played dead after Bevel shot her. Pinkney Carter, 69 years old, 18 years on death row. For killing his ex-girlfriend, her new partner, and her daughter, Carter was found guilty. After the crime, Carter escaped to Mexico by swimming across the Rio Grande and leaving his pickup at the Texas-Mexico border. He was promptly detained by Mexican officials on suspicion of possessing a weapon, but they released him 3 months later after he had paid a $1,000 fine. 2 years later, a state trooper in Kentucky arrested him on suspicion of public intoxication after spotting him on a wanted poster. Carter was sentenced to death for killing 35-year-old Liz Reed and 49-year-old Glenn Pafford, and to life for 16-year-old Courtney Smith's murder. John Mosley, 59 years old, 17 years on death row. John Mosley Jr. was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Linda Wilkes and sentenced to death for her son's Jaquan Mosley murder. This happened in 2005. The two disappeared in 2004, and when the authorities found Wilkes in Alachua County a month later, her body was burned. Her son's body was never found. Prosecutors said he killed Wilkes and the baby when she asked for child support. Mosley denied the baby was his. Harold Brady, 74 years old, 16 years on death row. A jury found Liberty City native Harold Brady guilty in 2007 of abducting a 5-year-old and abandoning her to die on the side of Interstate 75, where alligators ate her alive. Harold also attempted to murder the little girl's mother, but she survived the attack and later testified against him. Prosecutors claimed that on November 6, 1998, Brady put the mother and child in his rented Lincolntown car and drove them to Broward County, where Chandel Maycock was thrown out of the vehicle and choked until she passed out. 3 days later, Quatisha's body was discovered in a canal along Interstate 75, close to milepost 34. The medical examiner claimed that she was still alive when an alligator bit her head and torso, despite the fact that the other official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being thrown into rocks close to the canal. Her left arm had also been severed by alligators when the girl's body was found. Raymond Brgh, 69 years old, 14 years on death row. For a double homicide, Brgh was given the death penalty by the state of Florida. According to court records, Brgh used a hammer to kill Derrick King III, 20 years old, and 16-year-old Randall Brown. The murder took place at Bright's house. He stated that after a battle for the weapon, the two attacked him after threatening him with a gun. King received 20 additional blows to the rest of his body, in addition to 38 hits to the head and neck. Brown suffered 14 more injuries to his body, in addition to 8 to 10 distinct fractures in his skull. According to the testimony of doctors, both also displayed indications of defensive wounds. Matthew Kaylor, 48 years old, 14 years on death row. Melinda Hinson was essayed and strangled by Kaylor, a registered sex offender, at the Value Lodge Motel. The defendant was staying at the same hotel on the west side as the 13-year-old victim and her family. The girl was essayed by Kaylor in his room before she was strangled to death, according to evidence and witnesses in the 2009 trial. His concealment of her body led to its discovery 2 days later under the bed. Edward Zakrzewski, 58 years old, 27 years on death row, for the murders of his wife Sylvia, as well as his 2 children, Edward and Anna. Edward Zakrzewski was found guilty and given the death penalty. Zakrzewski and his wife were having marital issues before the killings. According to reports, he told a neighbor he would rather kill his family than go through with a divorce. At Eglin Air Force Base, where Zakrzewski worked for the Air Force, his 7-year-old son Edward called him early on June 9, 1994, to let him know Sylvia was discussing wanting a divorce. After that, Zakrzewski went on his lunch break and bought a machete. He returned to work after making the transaction, working all day. He hid the weapon in the bathroom when he got home earlier than the rest of his family that evening. Zakrzewski attacked Sylvia and rendered her helpless by beating her twice in the head with a crowbar after his wife and kids arrived home. He brought her to their bedroom and used the crowbar to hit her in the head once again. He then used a piece of rope to strangle her. Zakrzewski then called his son into the bedroom to brush his teeth. With the machete he had hidden behind the door, he assaulted Edward. The defensive wounds on Edward's arms and wrists showed that he tried to deflect some of the punches. Edward's severe head, neck, and back traumas caused his death. After that, Zakrzewski summoned his daughter Anna into the toilet, and he also killed her. There is some disagreement regarding whether Anna was killed as soon as she entered the bathroom or whether he made her bend over the bathtub where her brother's body was lying before killing her in an execution-style manner. Anna's hands and arms also had signs of defensive wounds. Following the killings, Zakrzewski drove to Orlando and booked a flight to Hawaii. He adopted a new name and settled down with a family who managed a spiritual commune in Hawaii. After the family he was staying with saw his image on Unsolved Mysteries, Zakrzewski turned himself in to Hawaiian authorities. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.